Now, I want to whet your appetite for kind of the next section, that is the last 4 steps of the historical context. I would generally say understanding the audience, understanding the author's situation, knowing the time period. Those are probably the less eye-popping in terms of the immediate insights that you gain. Still helpful, but not always as thrilling to understand. So I want to give you an example of what I think is quite thrilling before we take a break. And so I'm going to switch over to a look at the letter to Laodicea. So if you turn in your Bibles, you saw this referenced earlier in the notes, and I skipped over it because we're going to come to it now. You'll see the questions that I'm going to answer on the bottom of page 20. I'm jumping past, at the moment, the practice about applying the people and time of the book there on page 19, but you can definitely take time to do that on your own and understand again more of how the situation of the readers and the writer and the time period all affect the meaning of the text. But I'm very interested in this section from Revelation chapter 3, right? The book of Revelation, of course, has has many people very interested. Most people, some point in studying the Bible, decide, I want to study Revelation because that thing's just crazy. There's some wild stuff going on there. I want to know what it all means. What's important to know about the book is that the visions that are recorded in it, right, they had an author, John. They also had a specific audience, right, from the first century that lived in a set of 7 different cities. John used to travel to all these different cities. One of them happens to be Laodicea. And before John shares many of his visions that are in the book of Revelation, he has a special message given directly to each one of these churches. And that message speaks into their particular world, in their particular cities and social contexts. And so I want to look at how understanding the historical context of one of these cities, we'll look at another one, Sardis, but we'll begin here and look at Laodicea and what it's going to teach us about why John delivers the message that he does to them, which is particular to their situation and different from the messages he delivers to the other 6 churches. So, Laodicea, it is the last letter in Revelation 2 to 3, and it is on a circuit, what I would consider a circuit of John's ministry. He was a bit of a traveling elder, overseeing what was going on in a number of churches in the latter part of his life. Here in what you would see, what we would call today as Western Turkey, what was then the Roman province of Asia Minor. The circuit that John would walk about and travel here, you can see, covers some cities that you know about, like Ephesus. Some you might not be as familiar with, like Smyrna. But these are, in fact, if you follow the arrows, these are the cities in order that each receive a letter in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. 1 to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and finally, Laodicea. Right? You see a few other cities out here that you probably recognize, like Colossae, where Paul wrote to the church there, the letter of Colossians. But what is going on with Laodicea? I want to introduce a few things about it before we look at the specific message they received. Again, trying to bring the historical context to bear. One thing is that you see here on the map that Laodicea sits very close to 2 other cities, one Hierapolis and the other Colossae. And that will come up because of some geographical features that are important for us to know here in just a minute. So, the city of Laodicea is up on some hills on the south side of a valley, which has a river running through it called the Lycus River. Hierapolis, which is the city I mentioned that's near it, is on the north side of this Lycus River Valley. So you got Laodicea on the south, Hierapolis up on the north, and Colossae is actually out on the east. There was a road that came from Ephesus, which was a harbor town at this point. So people would come in by sea, making Ephesus a pretty lively, big, and growing town. Then there was a road that ran from Ephesus all the way to Laodicea. Laodicea was known for having lots of Roman dignitaries, officials, soldiers, kind of the international traveling types would often get found here in Laodicea because it was on a major road from the port in Ephesus. And so there you see the Ephesian gate where the road would end and enter into the city. Because of it being on the highways and byways of international Roman travelers, it was quite a boom town of sorts with, again, some of the Roman city classic features like the big bathhouses for the wealthy to rest in, stadiums, theaters. Here, in fact, is a picture of the remains of the theater as it looks today in Laodicea. Theaters actually help us estimate how big a town was because generally we look at the seating capacity of an ancient theater and from there extrapolate to the height of a city's population when it was built to that size. So maybe 150,000 people lived here, 25,000 Jews, a lot of wealth circulating in this city. There was some pretty good industry in the area. They were creating all sorts of medical ointments. They had a unique way of building tents and clothing with black sheep wool. And so here is the message they receive. That's kind of a little background. We'll look at the verse, and then we'll go for some more background to understand what's being delivered to them. This is a few verses in here you'll be very familiar with, right? To the angel of the church in Laodicea, write, the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the first of the creation of God, says this. So these are unique titles for Jesus, some of which that had just been ascribed to him in John's vision in Revelation chapter 1. Here's the message. Here's what he says. I know your deeds, that you are neither hot nor cold. I wish that you were cold or hot, but because you're lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I'll spit you out of my mouth. How have you heard this verse applied? What's your first reaction in terms of understanding the meaning of this passage? What is it telling you to be or to do? What do you think of when you think of like being cold or being hot in relation to God and how you're living?
It's one extreme or the other, basically. You either be all for him or all against him, maybe.
Yep, this is what I'm used to hearing. You know, you're either all for him or you're against him, right? You're either on fire for God or you're totally turned off and kind of an enemy. And so when we come to read this passage, a lot of times we tend to read that metaphor in here, right? That God, you know, Jesus is saying, I wish you were either totally against me or totally for me. I don't like you being in the middle, right? I mean, this is like a classic youth group sermon. Get off the fence. You're on the fence. He doesn't want you on the fence. You know, either curse God and die or sell out to him. Just don't be on that fence. Okay? Is that legitimate? Let's ask that question. Is that how we're supposed to understand it? Is that John's metaphor? Is that Jesus' meaning? Or is that our culture and our associations being read into the text? So let's ask this question, which is a leading question. How does understanding the water supply in the Lycus River Valley explain Jesus' exhortation to be either hot or cold rather than a lukewarm person whom he would vomit from his mouth? We're going to talk about a valley with a river running through it and how everyone gets their water, right? So we're going to talk about three different cities, Laodicea, Hierapolis, Colossae. They all had one valley with one river running through it, but none of them used that water source, okay, for their drinking and whatnot. So it ran through the valley, but they didn't share the source of their water, which would kind of make sense, because if Hierapolis is on a hill and Laodicea is on a hill and Colossae is on its little hill and that's down in the valley, it's kind of hard to get it with gravity technology up to use in your cities. And so you're faced with, well, we need to go find a water source that's higher than our city where gravity can push it into town. So how did they do that? Well, Colossae was kind of easy because they are at the foot of a huge mountain. Different languages, it could be some call it Chonaz or Cadmus. Here we've kind of got this beautiful mountain that gets snow-capped for a good part of the year, and fresh, cold, runoff water pours down it, and they're able to bring in some Colorado Rocky Mountain fresh water. So they're kind of living high on the hog in terms of their water supply, which wasn't the same situation for the other cities. Hierapolis, these guys had something cool. Well, no, they actually had something very hot. Up from the ground is bubbling these hot springs. And these hot springs, it wasn't the purest water. It was full of minerals being shot up through the earth because of the rock formation that's right under where the city was positioned. Oh, but they could take advantage of that, as many places do when you have a natural hot spring with hot water bubbling up in excess. Well, let's put a few walls up, catch it in a few areas. We'll start ourselves a therapeutic, mineral bath situation. And so this became a place where people would come for medicinal purposes. So Hierapolis was great. The hot springs were legendary. And people would, actually, if you go there today, same thing's going on. There's people from all across Europe and the world coming there to hang out in the hot springs of Hierapolis. It's kind of weird. It's like a bunch of archaeological remains, and then they kind of have this little small resort type area where everyone comes. It's interesting, but the same thing that was going on back then is going on today. Laodicea, they did not have the hot springs. They did not have a big mountain right behind them. So they had a problem. How do they get water? They had to turn to a source quite far away. And we'll get to that in just a moment. These are the actual hot springs of Hierapolis. Still to this day, you can go there and walk around in the hot water. I've done it. It wasn't that thrilling, but you see here the color of the ground is completely different. And these are all the mineral deposits that are in the water. It's really interesting when you stand over in Laodicea, which is on the south side of the Lycus River Valley, which is right here. When you stand over on the other side and look across at Hierapolis, you just see this giant white cliff from where all these deposits have come out and poured and collected over centuries. I don't know how long. So there's all the buildup of the minerals. It looks like snow, but it's 97 degrees, so it's not. But certainly captures your attention. Now, Laodicea, what's going on there? How do they get their water if they don't have any nice hot springs or cold water from the mountain? Well, they got it from 6 miles south of the city. Okay, and so they're having to go find a taller mountain, build a really long aqueduct, which you see here in the picture on the right, and push it using gravity into town. The problem is, by the time the water shows up there, it is neither cold nor hot. It is, in fact, lukewarm, and it is not clean, crisp, fresh water. No, it actually itself has kind of the mineral content of the water from Hierapolis, and it doesn't come in cold, and so it kind of comes with some deposits in it. And in fact, even today we can study what those deposits were, things like calcium carbonate and whatnot that have been stored up inside of that aqueduct and preserved for our study. So if you were to drink it, it'd be, you'd be swallowing kind of grit and sediment and all of that. Not the best water in town. So just to give you bring to life some of the residue that you can still see in the aqueducts today. And you see here the two aqueducts side by side that were pushing the water into town. Of course, if you're in that situation and that's the kind of water you're getting, you're not about to use that for your drinking. You can use it for other purposes, and that's what archaeologists guess at this point, that it was used for things like processing the black wool for manufacturing purposes. It was used for a city sewage system. I tried that out when I was using the restroom there in the archaeological remains of Laodicea. It's kind of weird, but I could see how it worked. You know, water doesn't have to be that bad to flush. In fact, there's a public latrine where I tried it out in Laodicea today. It's kind of fun. You just stand on a wall over here and make it happen. So we got no medicinal use like Hierapolis with their hot springs. We got no cold, clean, refreshing mountain water like at Colossae. Right, so this is the world of the Laodiceans. This is the neighborhood of the Laodiceans. So you come back to our question. Right? How does understanding the water supply in the Lycus River Valley explain Jesus' hey, be hot or be cold, but don't be lukewarm, or I'm going to vomit you out of my mouth like you guys do when you drink your water. Right? Think about it, right? The hot springs of Hierapolis, the cold water at Colossae, these served valuable purposes in each city. So what is Jesus doing? He's warning the Laodiceans that their actions are useless for God's purposes. You see, being hot or being cold is not about being on fire for God or totally against Him. I mean, when you think about it, that makes sense, because it would just be awkward, strange, illogical, and I don't see the benefit of how it would be good for people to be 100% and fully against God. Why in the world would Jesus come out saying, please be totally for me, or just, like kill people if they're Christian? That doesn't make any sense. Be totally against me. No, what he's saying, be hot, be cold. He's be useful. Your actions should be valuable. But what he says is, I know your deeds, and they're neither hot or cold. They are not serving my purpose in any way, shape, or form. And so there is not an encouragement to be against him or to be for him. There is just an encouragement to be serving his purposes in your context with the actions that you take. You see, when we understand this kind of historical context about the geography and physical setting of Laodicea, right, we can move away from misguided youth group sermons and towards the true meaning of the text. We can hear Jesus' voice as we're supposed to experience it, as opposed to we take the words in the Bible, we mix them with our assumptions, and we create something that is much more dangerous than had we not dealt with it at all. I hope you are inspired that, man, there is more there. Sometimes because we get familiar with the Scripture based on whatever tradition we come from, we get to a spot where we think yeah, I got that. Yeah, I know it, and it's not as amazing as I thought it should be. It's just the stuff you believe, and you go in the Bible and you keep finding the same stuff because you kind of ignore the other parts, don't understand some parts, and then just kind of get to the clear ones that you agree with, and it kind of says the same thing every time, just because that's your approach to reading it and that's your approach to studying it. But with understanding, pay attention to the purpose. Look at the plan and the flow of thought, and pay attention to the immediate context, and let's understand the author and a little bit about the readers, and make sure we pay attention to the situation that's being addressed at this point in time. And then we start looking at things like we just showed you, some of these geographic or physical or cultural settings. hope you see that no, actually, there's a lot more of the Bible that you can unlock. You know, you've grasped, and many people can grasp by just picking up a New Testament, the basic gospel truths. But there's more. There's more you can know about God, His ways, and what type of direction that lays out for us today. Let's take a journey back in time to an amazing feat of God that's recorded in Judges chapters 4 and 5. Along the way, I'll answer the questions in your notes there on page 21. It may not be the most inspiring title, but in this section of Scripture, God uses geography to do what He wants to do. Let me just read the heart of the story, and then we'll look at how the details, all in the context of what was going on, and specifically the geographical setting, helps us understand how the story unfolded. So we're going to start in verse 12, Judges chapter 4, verse 12. I'm just going to read a few verses here. It says, "Then they told Sisera," that is, they, being the advisors, told Sisera, who is a commander of an army that was based at a city called Hatzor. We'll look at that on a map in just a moment. So they told the commander Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. Okay, we'll learn that Barak is the commander of the Israelite army in this battle. We'll figure out exactly where Mount Tabor is in just a second. Here's how the battle went down. Sisera called together all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the people who were with him, from Haroshet Chagoyim to the river Kishon. Deborah said to Barak, "Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands." How did she know that? "Behold, the Lord has gone out before you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. The Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera jumped off his chariot and ran away on foot. Whoa. I read that. That's awesome. It's a little weird. I'm not sure if you have 900 chariots, why you would jump off your chariot, start running on foot. Probably would have stayed in it, but maybe we'll figure out why he did that in just a moment. So you come across a story like this, and you have Deborah saying, "Hey, look, Barak, the Lord's gone before you. Get down there and fight." How'd she know? Was it an impulse? Was it a kind of a direct sense or a tingling? Was it, I mean, how did that work? It's an interesting question to ask if we can get an answer. Sometimes we can't. In this case, we can. So I want to look about how this happened by understanding the physical setting. So the situation, just to back up, what is the situation in Judges 4 and 5? Again, in the period of the Judges, you don't have a united nation of the Israelites. There's not a centralized king. They kind of exist as different separate tribes, so it's more of a tribal setting. Probably what we think of today is still existing in different parts of rural Papua New Guinea or rural sub-Saharan Africa. Think kind of a tribal setting. And so what we have is one powerful king that is able to start dominating local tribes of Israel. This king's name is Yabin, and he is in a city called Hatzor. He has a commander of his army named Sisera, and this guy is well equipped when it comes to the number of chariots that he has. If you read in the text, it talks about all these chariots were in a place called the Jezreel Valley. Now, normally when you're reading Old Testament stories, unless you've had the unique privilege of either traveling to Israel or spent a lot of time in kind of Bible atlas books, looking at maps and whatnot, when you read stories and you hear references to a king in Hatzor and a bunch of chariots in the Jezreel Valley, those are like meaningless statements. Right? I mean, if I tell you right now, oh man, you should have been with me last week. I rode a unicycle down a road in New York City. It was fun. You can imagine what that was like. You know what a unicycle is. You have a vision of New York City, the buildings. You've either been there or you've seen it on TV, and you can, oh yeah, I can imagine that. It doesn't work that way with the Bible for many of us. There's a king in Hatzor, and he's got chariots in the Jezreel Valley. Well, why not just tell me nothing? Because I imagine the same thing. There's stuff somewhere with someone who's somewhere. This is how you normally feel when you read the Old Testament. It's just kind of, yes, and so the king decided to go down the road, blah, 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 and he came to blah, blah city, and then blah met blah, and blah, blah was the son of blah, blah, and so blah, blah. It's like, okay, next chapter. Don't know what just happened there. See, this happens because we can't imagine. We can't bring it to life. It's very foreign, okay? And so that often makes dynamic stories in the Old Testament very boring. Something that could be 3D and full of action comes off as 2D, okay? It's like a silent film instead of this awesome 3D action film that we could be experiencing. That's often why we like teachers and whatnot that can bring stuff to life, or why we like something like the Bible movie, because we can kind of see and experience and feel, and there's music by the best of the best composers in the background, and we really get a sense of the experience. So where are these people? How can we get a sense of what's actually happening here? Let me throw up a map here. The center of the action is inside that green oval. Inside that green oval is the Jezreel Valley. This is where all the events of the story take place. You can see up the Jordan Valley, just above the Sea of Galilee, is the city of Hatzor. It's not much of a city today. I don't recommend visiting it. It's kind of disappointing. It was burned to the ground many times, and all we have is a bunch of black rocks kind of laying around and some foundation stones. But this was a critical city. I'll show you why in just a moment. Hatzor, that is. And the Jezreel Valley was a critical crossroads. So if you look on this map, I've just highlighted a couple of the important international highways from this time period. And so, the King's Highway is in red, and then we've got the purple offshoot, the Via Maris, i.e. the Way of the Sea, which goes along the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. These highways are important because it connects kind of the seat of Mesopotamian empires. Originally the Sumerian Empire, at one time the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, the Assyrians were based all up in this area. Then you've got Egypt and all of its kingdoms down here, and Israel is the land between. It's kind of the area that empires and kingdoms up in the Mesopotamian, empires down in Egypt fight over. And many of the stories in the Old Testament are just kind of, Israel trying to deal with the fact that they're in between two empires, and whenever one of them gets strong, they come rushing in. And so they had a lot of, in a couple important thoroughfares. Hatzor is right here. And so it lies right on the Via Maris. It's the city, that's kind of connecting the King's Highway to the Via Maris. So it's on that crossroads, which cuts through Hatzor and actually cuts through the Jezreel, kind of along the northern ridge of the Jezreel Valley and then over to the edge of the sea. So people fought over that area all the time, right? If you can control the trade routes, you can find great wealth and power. Okay, and so that's why we have these kind of battles in these locations, just to give you a sense of why they happened. Now, here's the actual conflict they got into. The prophetess Deborah turns to Baruch and says, okay, it's time to set ourselves free from this oppression. And he tells them you need to go get people together from the tribes of Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali. And, well, all right, as verse 10 says, if you were to read it here, Judges 4:10, Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up with him. Deborah also went up with him. Okay, so I'm just trying to capture some of the highlights of the story. What do? Well, they all get together, and as we read in the story, they gather on a mountain called Mount Tabor. Well, okay, where are these people coming from, and where is this mountain? Let's go back and look at it on a map. So Zebulun and Naphtali are in these hill country regions. Again, this is the Jezreel Valley. The tribe of Issachar was here. And so Barak went off to get people from Zebulun and Naphtali to come to Mount Tabor to join folks from the tribe of Issachar. And now it was time to wait until it was ready to fight, right? Because remember, the story is Sisera had iron chariots in the Jezreel Valley, and now the Israelites have their army up here on Mount Tabor. Well, how did this go down? So we just read it. Let's read it again. Sisera, he gathers his 900 chariots, gets all his men together. Here's one of those blank moments if you're just reading it on your own. Oh yeah, he got them all together from that place all the way to that river. Well, that's good for him. Nothing lands, you know. I mean, it's fun. I mean, it's fun to learn how to say it. Like, oh no, he got them together from Haroshet Hagoyim. Like, that was fun, but still I don't know where that is. Deborah says to Barak, go, this is the day that the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Okay, so Barak goes down with his 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routs Sisera, so much so. All right, it says Barak jumps off his chariot, flees on foot, and then Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as, that place again. And all the troops of Sisera fell by the sword, and not a man was left. Whoa. So, how'd that happen? How'd that all work? How in the world could a bunch of foot soldiers running down a hill overtake 900 iron chariots? How could they overcome advanced technology? Is it just kind of an inexplicable way in which God made the army of Sisera just incompetent? Well, let's check out how it happened. Because Judges chapter 5 happens to be a song. Maybe this is what they did, I guess. After you have a military victory, you write a song about it. So Deborah and Barak got together and decided to put a little duet together. And so if you read Judges chapter 5, you can sing that song, maybe on your own, not here, but that it gives us a lot of insight as to how the battle went down. It says here in verses 15 and 18, the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. Yes, Issachar was with Barak, rushing after him into the valley. The people of Zebulun risked their very lives. So did Naphtali on the heights of the field. I still can't figure out what the tune of the song is. I've been reading this for years. Maybe I can figure out in Hebrew. Kings came, they fought. The kings of Canaan fought at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo, but they carried off no silver and no plunder. From the heavens, the stars fought. From the courses, they fought against Sisera. The river Kishon swept them away, the age-old river, the river Kishon. Some of that made sense. I get it. The people from Zebulun, Naphtali, Issachar, they came, they fought. I get it. The kings also of Canaan came and they fought. Get that. Some of this I don't get. What's going on with the stars? You know? So first, before we deal with some of those strange elements about the stars fighting, let's review what we just saw and put it back in its geographical context. So Barak leads his men near a city called Ta'anach. It's close to this river. Okay, so let's go back to our battle map. And I've marked with a couple swords there in this map where this particular battle went down. You see Tanakh there marked on the map as well. What's not as clear in this particular map, so I'll add it, is that the Kishon River is running just about through the middle of the Jezreel Valley. Now, different times of the year, it was full or dry, there or not there, okay? So it was a little bit more of a river that needed a rainy season to exist. So what else do we learn? The Kishon River helped defeat the chariots and army. Now, okay, that's one you got to figure out. And the stars fought against Sisera. You know, I don't know of any other story where the stars started punching people in the face. Very interesting. You know, I mean, and I don't think they mean celebrities. I don't think it was like Samson or, you know, other, you know, old Israelite stars came out of retirement or something. So what does it mean? Well, let me give you some background information from a book that I would encourage being kind of the number one go-to book for figuring out a little bit of historical background information on any verse in the Bible. Okay, it's called the IVP Bible Background Commentary. There's one for the Old Testament. There's one for the New Testament. You can get them in book form. You can also get them in electronic form. That's how I have them on my computers and iStuff. But let me ask you this question, because maybe there's a farmer in the room. Maybe you've been to the Jezreel Valley. I don't know. Anyone know what kind of soil is there? Right? Easy question, sure. What? Why would I need to know what kind of dirt is in the Jezreel Valley? Such a strange question. Well, so Terra Rosa, which is soil formed by a rock that they have a lot of in Israel, which is Cenomanian limestone. If any of that means something to you, red earth, well, yeah, it's like a thick red clay that holds a lot of water. Okay, so it's very fertile in that sense. I mean, it's great for growing stuff in the Jezreel Valley because of that soil, because of the way it retains water. But it's very clingy when wet, so not the best for walking around in your sandals, since they'll double, triple, quadruple in size as the mud sticks on you. Right? Look at the Jezreel Valley today. This is a picture I took while I was standing on Mount Carmel. They can get some, you know, multiple harvests out of the Jezreel Valley because of how this soil acts. Well, how does God use this Terra Rosa soil, the stars, the river Kishon, to rout Sisera and all his chariots and army? Well, here's the book I was mentioning, the IVP, Background Commentary on the Old Testament. And if you were to read its commentary on these verses, it says, with the aid of the stars in the heavens, which is a source of rain in Ugaritic and Mesopotamian epic, whatever that means, I could tell you, but it would get us off track. The battle at the Kishon was decided by an unusual summer storm that sent torrents of water flooding into the Kishon River. As the banks overflowed, the saturated ground eliminated the effectiveness of these 900 iron chariots. Anyone know when the time was back in these days for kings to go to war? Like if you remember the story of David when it says, like, you know, it was a time for kings to go to war and he decided to not go. Summer, right? In Israel, there's really two seasons. There's the 6 months of rain and the 6 months of dry, okay? Now as you move from the north to the south, there's more rain in the north, less in the south, all that stuff. But up here in the northern half of Israel, that's what we're talking about. There's a rainy season, there's a dry season. Kings go to war when it's not going to rain. That's just what you did, and then you kind of called it quits. Hey, the rain's coming, you good, we're good, we'll go back, don't kill anyone. See you in 6 months. You know, they just kind of had a gentleman's agreement somehow. So what's crazy about this story is the Israelites have gathered for war, Sisera's gathered for war, and there shouldn't be any rain coming. But all of a sudden, the clouds pick up, things are turning gray and dark, and what does Deborah figure out? Hey, the Lord has gone before you, Barak. Fight now. She didn't get an internal word of like, this is the time to say yes. She saw rain coming. So they cruise down the mountain, and what happens? As the rain pours in, the chariots all get stuck in the mud. That's great, you've got this awesome army and have perfected how to use it to dominate the rest of us, but you can't go anywhere, buddy. God sends a big storm, the ground floods with water, we get all this sticky mud, the chariots are stuck, and Israel takes advantage. It shouldn't have happened. The climate would say this wouldn't happen, but God made it happen. Just gives you a different take, a deeper understanding of what was going on when Deborah says, go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you? Hasn't he sent the rain when our enemy would least expect it? So there's all sorts of insights we can bring to the table in terms of understanding stories in the Bible or the meaning of warnings, like in the book of Revelation, by having a grasp of the physical setting.